5 centuries ago, a man looked at the world as it truly was, not as poets wished it to be. He stripped the illusion from virtue, dissected loyalty, and measured the anatomy of power without pity. And though his name was cursed by those who feared truth, his vision was not confined to princes or palaces. It was a mirror for every age, including ours. He understood that men are moved more by fear than by reason, more by appearance than by substance. That the crowd does not seek justice, it seeks direction. The ruler who learns this, whether he governs a nation or commands a corporation, rules not through benevolence, but through comprehension of human frailty. He saw it then. We live it now. Look around you. The thrones have changed shape. The crowns have become logos. The armies have turned into networks. Yet the game remains. Influence is the new battlefield. Information the new sword. Reputation the new armor. The one who controls perception controls reality itself. Machiavelli wrote of princes, but in truth he wrote of men, and men have not changed. He warned that those who depend on the loyalty of others will perish by it. For loyalty is a mask worn only as long as it is useful. When power shifts, so does allegiance. The wise do not lament betrayal, they anticipate it. They build systems, not friendships. They design structures so that even betrayal serves them. He saw how morality, when weaponized, becomes the most seductive form of control. For when people believe they are righteous, they cease to question who profits from their virtue. He would tell you that moral outrage is the new theater of obedience, and that those who manufacture it command both the stage and the spectators. The modern world, he would say, is a republic of appearances. Politicians play the saint while they move like thieves. Corporations parade compassion while they harvest attention like crops. Even the common man has learned the art of self-presentation, curating his life like propaganda. Everyone is a prince now, each seeking to rule a small digital kingdom of perception. But he would not condemn it. He would observe it coldly, clearly, and remind you that the desire for control is not evil. It is the root of all civilization. Without it, there is chaos. Without hierarchy, there is despair. The only sin in his eyes was ignorance of one's own nature, pretending purity while hungering for power. Machiavelli saw that to survive is not to be loved, but to be necessary. Power belongs not to those who shout the loudest, but to those whose removal would cause collapse. The modern prince is not the loudest voice in the room. He is the one whose silence would stop the room from moving. He builds dependence as quietly as a spider weaves a web. He would look at our democracies and see not freedom, but management, not liberty, but controlled chaos. He would recognize in every protest a negotiation between ideal and interest, in every promise a calculated transaction. He would tell you that politics is not the art of serving people, it is the art of convincing people that service and manipulation are the same act. He knew that to rule men, you must understand their illusions, their need for hope, for belonging, for enemies. The modern leader, like the ancient prince, must feed these needs without ever becoming a victim of them. He must appear human enough to be loved, but distant enough to be feared. He must master the paradox of leadership to be both the shepherd and the wolf. He predicted that every age would believe itself more moral than the last, yet every age would serve the same gods: ambition, fear, desire. Today we call them productivity, safety, and happiness. But their essence is unchanged. Men chase control, security, and pleasure, and the one who provides the illusion of all three becomes their ruler. He would tell you that the greatest threat to power is comfort, for comfort breeds forgetfulness. The prince who wishes to endure must keep his people slightly afraid, afraid of enemies, of loss, of one another. Not enough to revolt, but enough to obey. Fear is not cruelty, it is maintenance. And yet he would not preach despair. He would say that even within the machinery of manipulation, there lies freedom for the one who sees. To understand power is to be liberated from its spell, to see that politics is not evil, but inevitable. That morality is not the enemy of realism, but its mask. That human nature, though cruel, is predictable, and in that predictability lies control. Machiavelli would tell you that truth itself is a political weapon. The wise use it sparingly. The masses demand comfort more than clarity, and clarity is too sharp for their hands. To govern minds, one must offer narratives, not facts. Facts divide, stories unify. The ruler who masters narrative commands the soul of his time. He foresaw a future in which every citizen would become both ruler and subject, managing his own image, defending his own ideology, enslaved by his own reflection. He would see in our screens the perfect evolution of his theory, a society where power is invisible because it lives inside every individual. We have become both prince and prisoner. He would remind you that no system, however enlightened, escapes corruption. Republics rot slower than tyrannies, but they rot all the same. The decay begins not in institutions, but in hearts, when the people prefer comfort to truth, applause to achievement, virtue to effectiveness. That is when the wolves return, wearing crowns of mercy. And still, he would not weep, for he was no moralist. He saw that corruption is not a disease of politics, it is its heartbeat. Power, like fire, must consume to stay alive. It burns through laws, ideologies, and men, leaving behind only ashes and instruction. From those ashes, the next generation builds again convinced it has discovered purity. He would tell you that to lead is to walk alone through fire, to bear the hatred of those you protect, the suspicion of those you trust, and the envy of those who need you most. Leadership is not a crown, but a sentence. The ruler pays with his peace for the order of others. That is the true cost of command. Machiavelli would not marvel at our technology, our democracy, or our moral progress. He would see only the same drama played on a larger stage. He would recognize our influencers as courtiers, our journalists as scribes, our algorithms as ministers of propaganda. He would smile not in admiration, but in recognition. For he had seen it all before, in Florence, in Rome, in the courts of princes who believed themselves gods. He would remind us that human nature does not evolve, it adapts. The instruments change, but the music remains. The lust for relevance, the hunger for control, the worship of image, these are eternal. We are not modern. We are ancient creatures with digital tools. And if you asked him how to survive this age, he would not tell you to be good. He would tell you to be awake, to see through the theater, to play your role without believing it, to master emotion without denying it, to use virtue when it serves power and discard it when it does not. For morality, detached from outcome, is a luxury of the powerless. He would whisper that in every empire, there comes a moment when illusion and reality collide, when the people discover that the virtue of their leaders was only the mask of their ambition. In that moment, nations either collapse or evolve. The wise prepare for it. The foolish call it betrayal. And perhaps he would conclude with this, that history is not the story of progress, but of control refined. Each generation refines its tools of influence, not its understanding of truth. And so we return, again and again, to the same eternal stage, only the costumes change. 500 years ago, Machiavelli wrote not for his time, but for ours, for the age where perception is power, where fear is policy, where virtue is marketing, and where truth is negotiable. He did not create the darkness, he merely turned on the light. And if you dare to look into it, you may find not a monster, but a mirror. He would tell you that men have always worshipped illusions more faithfully than gods, because illusions promise comfort while truth demands sacrifice. The crowd does not crave enlightenment, it craves narrative. The prince who understands this will never waste his breath on truth alone. He will give the people something to believe in, something that flatters their despair. Every ideology is born this way, not from reason, but from the human need to give chaos a name. In our age, this illusion has become democracy's heartbeat. We are told we choose, yet our choices are curated by the invisible hand of persuasion. The slogans change, the machinery does not. What we call public opinion is the artful orchestration of private interest disguised as freedom. And still, the masses feel empowered, for nothing sedates the powerless like the illusion of choice. He would study our institutions as a physician studies symptoms. He would note that when citizens demand safety more than sovereignty, the state grows teeth and calls it protection. He would see in the modern surveillance apparatus the perfect realization of his theory: power that does not need to strike, only to watch. Fear, he wrote, is more efficient than punishment. And so, we built nations that do not beat their people, they merely observe them, until the people learn to police themselves. This is not tyranny, it is evolution. The whip has been replaced by the algorithm, the prison by the profile, and men chain themselves willingly for the comfort of being seen. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. He knew that control does not begin with force, it begins with attention. Whoever controls attention controls will, and whoever controls will commands the future. He would look at our screens and see fortresses more secure than any castle, bastions of distraction that keep men docile, self-absorbed, endlessly entertained. He would call this the most sophisticated despotism in history, the rule of appetite disguised as freedom. When pleasure becomes policy, obedience requires no chains. He would tell you that every empire, no matter how enlightened, builds itself upon the management of fear. The wise ruler does not abolish fear, he redistributes it. He redirects it toward enemies, real or imagined, toward crises and catastrophes that justify his control. Fear unites where love divides. In times of peace, he would warn, men forget their dependence and grow bold. In times of crisis, they kneel. The modern ruler knows this well, and thus ensures that peace never feels too safe, that chaos always lurks close enough to be useful. He would see in our leaders not the tyrants of old, but actors, men skilled not in conquest, but in communication. He would call them illusionists of morality masters, of emotional rhetoric, who manufacture compassion as currency. He would see in their speeches the same cold arithmetic he once taught princes, how to appear humane while remaining untouchable, for the crowd forgives anything that flatters its conscience. To rule today, one must master empathy as performance, morality as theater. The stage has simply grown global, the applause digital. He would not despise this theater. He would respect its craft. He would remind you that appearance is not deceit, it is strategy. The prince must always appear virtuous, even when necessity compels the opposite, because perception is the foundation of authority. The people must never see the ruler's calculations, they must see his convictions. The art of governance is the art of hiding the mechanism behind the miracle. Those who reveal too much truth are not brave, they are suicidal. He would turn to the matter of ambition, that ancient fire that built and burned every civilization. He would say that ambition is neither virtue nor vice. It is nature's hunger expressing itself through man. To suppress it is to deny life itself. To misdirect it is to destroy nations. The wise ruler does not punish ambition, he harnesses it. He channels the desires of others so that their self-interest serves his design. This is not cruelty, but architecture. Every hierarchy is built on redirected ambition, every peace sustained by managed hunger. He would see that our world worships equality in word, but hierarchy in deed. Men claim to despise power, yet spend their lives chasing its smallest fragment. The egalitarian dream, he would whisper, is merely the new costume of envy. When all cannot rule, they demand that no one should. Thus, modern morality disguises impotence as virtue. The cry for fairness is often the voice of resentment. Machiavelli would not mock this. He would merely observe that resentment, too, is a tool. The clever ruler gives the resentful symbols of victory while keeping substance for himself. He would warn that in every system, corruption begins not from greed but from fatigue. When the guardians of order grow tired of vigilance, when the ruled grow accustomed to comfort, decay sets in quietly, like rot beneath marble. A nation falls not when it is conquered, but when its people forget that freedom is dangerous. He would say that comfort is the most seductive tyrant of all, because it asks for nothing while taking everything. He would see in our modern leaders a strange weakness. They wish to be loved more than obeyed. He would call this the death of authority. For love is fleeting, born of emotion. Fear is constant, born of instinct. He would not advocate cruelty, but balance. The ruler must be loved if possible, feared if necessary, and respected always. Respect, he would say, is the only true currency of power, for it survives both affection and hatred. The modern prince who chases popularity has already surrendered. He would look at our age of exposure and laugh. Men believe that transparency breeds honesty, yet it only breeds manipulation. When everyone can see, everyone performs. Truth retreats into shadows, for sincerity cannot survive the glare of constant visibility. He would say that secrecy is not the enemy of democracy, it is its oxygen. Without mystery, authority collapses into spectacle. The people addicted to entertainment mistake access for agency. They do not want truth, they want drama. He would reflect on betrayal, that most constant companion of power. He would say that betrayal is not a crime but a law of nature. Men change sides not out of malice but survival. The prince who understands this never trusts words, only patterns. He does not punish betrayal in anger. He uses it as signal proof that his control has weakened, his favors misaligned. Every act of treachery is a mirror reflecting the fault lines of command. The wise ruler does not mourn it. He studies it. He would tell you that loyalty cannot be demanded. It must be engineered. Men are loyal to interests, not ideals. Give them purpose. Give them fear. Give them profit, and they will serve. Take these away, and they will forget your name. Thus, every ruler must design systems where the disloyal lose more by rebellion than by obedience. Fear of loss is the anchor of loyalty. Love of gain is its sail. He would consider our obsession with morality and call it a new religion of powerlessness. In every era, the weak invent virtue to restrain the strong, and the strong adopt it to legitimize their dominance. It is a cycle as old as politics itself. Machiavelli would not condemn morality, but he would strip it of sanctity. He would call it what it is, a tool, noble in purpose, dangerous in excess. The prince must wield morality as a shield, never as a chain. He would see that our world has replaced God with visibility. The new heaven is the feed, the new priesthood, the algorithm. Men confess not to absolve their sins, but to maintain relevance. He would call this the most ingenious invention of power, self-surveillance, disguised as freedom of expression. He would understand that the new tyranny requires no enforcers. Men enforce it upon themselves, terrified of being unseen. He would tell you that leadership is not measured by applause, but by endurance, that true rulers outlive the noise, their names surviving not because they were loved, but because they shaped the structure of history. Greatness, he would say, is not moral, it is consequential. The world remembers not who was good, but who was necessary. He would see in our fragmentation the same pattern he saw in Italy, a land torn by pride, each city believing itself sovereign, each leader believing himself divine. He would say that unity, if it comes, will not be born of love, but of necessity. Crisis will forge coherence where ideals could not. This, he would whisper, is the secret rhythm of civilization, collapse, consolidation, control. And still, beneath his cynicism, there would be a strange reverence for man's capacity to build order out of chaos, to rise from ruin with the same hunger that destroyed him. He would see in every failure the seed of renewal, in every tyranny the shadow of a new republic. He would understand that the dance of power and virtue is endless, and that wisdom lies not in ending it, but in playing it well. He would leave us with a truth colder than comfort and sharper than hope, that the world has never been moral, only manageable. And those who understand this not with cruelty, but with clarity will inherit the future. He would walk among us unseen, his words carried not by parchment but by code, his philosophy reborn in algorithms, his principles cloaked in policy. He would observe that the art of ruling has not perished, it has become invisible. The scepter has dissolved into data, the throne into influence, the crown into anonymity. The new prince does not appear on balconies. He speaks through systems, shapes decisions before they are conscious, and governs through the quiet tyranny of design. What we call convenience he would call control perfected. When the instrument of authority feels like a choice, the ruler has achieved mastery. He would look at our democracies and laugh softly, not out of contempt, but recognition. He would see parliaments as palaces of theater, elections as rituals of renewal, debates as dances of illusion. He would say that the modern state does not seek to suppress its people, but to exhaust them to fill every moment with trivial conflict until no energy remains for rebellion. In this, he would see genius. A tired population is easier to govern than a terrified one. Exhaustion is the new form of obedience. He would note that men today fear insignificance more than death. This, he would whisper, is the weakness of our time. Vanity has replaced virtue as the axis of existence. Men no longer strive for greatness, they strive for attention. The ruler who understands this can control without force, for the governed willingly enslave themselves to visibility. Give them mirrors instead of bread, applause instead of justice, and they will call it freedom. He would see in the chaos of our media a precise equilibrium. Too much truth would tear the fabric of the state. Too much deception would destroy trust. So the modern ruler, he would say, must calibrate feeding the people fragments of truth wrapped in myth, enough to sustain belief without awakening rebellion. In this balance lies the genius of modern governance, not to silence dissent, but to drown it in noise. The people who argue endlessly believe they are free, not realizing that confusion is the most efficient prison of all. He would turn his gaze to war, not the kind fought with weapons, but with influence. He would say that the battlefield of our age is the mind, and the victor is the one who controls perception. Armies are replaced by narratives, bombs by headlines, invasions by persuasion. Empires expand not through conquest, but through culture. He would see this as the natural evolution of his principles. The most efficient form of domination is the one that feels voluntary. When a people adopt the values of their ruler, their chains vanish in belief. He would remind us that power never disappears, it only migrates. When kings fell, it moved to parliaments. When parliaments faltered, it moved to corporations. When corporations grew hated, it dissolved into data. The ruler of tomorrow, he would say, will be unseen, not a man, but a mechanism. Those who understand how to command that mechanism will inherit the world. Those who do not will worship it. He would not pity the masses. He would see in their submission a kind of logic. Most men, he wrote, do not want freedom. They want safety, meaning routine. To govern them is to understand their hunger for structure. To free them too much is to terrify them. The wise ruler provides illusion of freedom space, enough for self-expression, boundaries enough for comfort. This balance, he would insist, is the secret to lasting power. Absolute freedom destroys itself. Controlled freedom endures. He would say that corruption today wears the face of virtue. Every cause hides an agenda. Every promise hides a transaction. The wise man does not reject morality, he decodes it. He asks not, is this good? But who benefits? For in the theater of politics, every virtue is an investment, every ideal a strategy. The modern prince speaks of equality while building hierarchy, of peace while managing conflict, of transparency while concealing intent. This is not hypocrisy, it is realism. The language of morality is the currency of control. He would note that technology has done what tyranny never could, made obedience enjoyable. Men who once rebelled against kings now surrender to convenience. They volunteer their secrets, confess their desires, trade privacy for entertainment. The prince no longer needs prisons, he needs platforms. He does not silence dissent, he monetizes it. He does not threaten rebellion, he redirects it into spectacle. The age of coercion has given way to the age of consent, and in this he would see perfection. He would reflect on virtue and say, it is still useful not as a moral guide, but as a political instrument. Appear virtuous, he would whisper, even when necessity demands vice. The masses must never see your calculations. They must see your conviction. Virtue must be your costume, not your constraint. For power is not evil. It is amoral like nature, like war, like time itself. The ruler who understands this moves without guilt, only precision. He acts not from passion, but from proportion. He would study our leaders and see that most are prisoners of their own image. They govern not by will, but by fear of losing approval. This, he would warn, is the tragedy of democracy's actors, men who cannot choose necessity over popularity. The true ruler, he would say, must learn to live beyond applause, to act without permission, to endure misunderstanding. To govern well is to be misjudged by those you protect. Leadership is not reward. It is sacrifice disguised as authority. He would understand exile, for he lived it. He would know that every ruler faces isolation not from the people, but from equality itself. To lead is to be alone in sight of all. He would say that solitude is not punishment, but purification, the crucible in which judgment is forged. The prince must listen to counsel, but trust his own cold reason. To depend on the approval of others is to die by their moods. The ruler must think as an eagle flies above pity, above panic, above praise. He would watch the collapse of institutions and call it predictable. For all systems, he would say, decay from the same source, excess idealism. When men believe their creation eternal, they forget the need for adaptation. Stability breeds arrogance. Arrogance breeds blindness. Blindness invites destruction. The wise ruler renews decay before it becomes visible. He reforms not because he must, but because he can. To change in time is to survive. He would remind us that every generation must rediscover power, as if for the first time. They must learn again that justice requires strength, that peace requires vigilance, that freedom requires order. These are not contradictions, they are necessities. The dreamers call them paradoxes, because they have never ruled. The ruler knows that life itself is contradiction, made flesh. Mercy and cruelty, truth and deceit, hope and fear, all must be held in one steady hand. He would not call himself a prophet, only a realist. Yet his realism burns brighter now than ever, because our world, though draped in progress, still runs on the same primal laws. The names have changed: citizen for subject, influencer for prince, economy for empire, but the motives are eternal. Men seek to rule, to belong, to survive. The rest is ornament. And as the night deepens, he would leave us with one final whisper, that the greatest danger to any age is not tyranny, but innocence. For innocence blinds the powerful to their nature, and blinds the powerless to their chains. The only path forward, he would say, is not purity but understanding. To see clearly, to act deliberately, to bear the weight of necessity without apology. For those who can do this, the future is already theirs, because power, like time, favors the prepared. He would point to the leaders of our corporations, men who command empires of code and clouds, and say they are the new Medici, not bound by land or blood, but by information, by the invisible tributaries of data that flow from every human life into their coffers. He would call them the new princes of abstraction, their soldiers not men but algorithms, their wars fought not with swords but with updates. They conquer without marching, rule without coronation, and shape the will of billions while claiming to serve it. The old rulers controlled geography, the new ones control attention, and he would see that attention is the final frontier of sovereignty. Whoever commands it owns man. He would study the alliances of nations and laugh at their fragile choreography. Treaties, he would say, are not promises, they are pauses between betrayals. Look at the balance of power, the handshakes at summits, the smiles before sanctions, the quiet assassinations of reputation and currency. Every state pretends morality until necessity arrives. He would say the global order is not an orchestra of ideals, but a marketplace of fear, where alliances are rented, not owned. He would see that diplomacy is war conducted through politeness, and that politeness, when strategic, is sharper than any blade. He would observe how revolutions now wear the costume of justice, how every uprising begins with purity and ends in hierarchy. He would see that each generation must play this cycle, first outrage, then order, then the slow corruption of victory. He would tell you that rebellion is not the enemy of power, it is its renewal. Every revolution is a tool of evolution, clearing out the old elite to make space for the new. But nothing truly changes except the faces of the throne. He would whisper that the flag of liberation always hides the birth of another ruler. He would turn his gaze to the marketplace and see another kingdom of manipulation. He would say commerce is the most refined form of conquest, for it enslaves through desire rather than fear. Nations once conquered territory, now they conquer habits. Every advertisement, every logo, every subscription is a contract of submission. The merchants of our time do not seek land, they seek the mind's repetition. And he would say that brand loyalty is the modern form of feudalism, where the serf pays willingly and calls it identity. He would see how warfare has evolved into spectacle, no longer measured in casualties but in narratives. Nations now fight with optics: who is righteous, who is victim, who is seen. He would call it aesthetic war, armies draped in virtue, policies dressed in compassion, every missile launch framed as defense, every sanction wrapped in humanitarian concern. The moral language of modern warfare, he would say, is the most effective disguise for imperial ambition. Men kill for the same reasons as always: resources, dominance, pride, but now they decorate the violence with conscience. He would see the emergence of artificial intelligence and smile with foreknowledge. He once wrote that fortune must be mastered by virtue, meaning the courage to act before fate decides. He would say that AI is the new fortune, unpredictable, powerful, and indifferent. The rulers who understand its language will ride it as princes rode armies. The ones who fear it will become its subjects. He would not ask whether machines should rule, he would ask who commands the machines. For in every age, tools are never neutral. They always serve someone's will. He would analyze social movements and see how outrage is now the currency of influence. The more one offends, the more one ascends. He would say this is not morality, it is power disguised as principle. He would observe that activism has replaced religion as the moral stage of the modern soul. The heretics of old were burned by priests. Today they are cancelled by mobs. Yet the same mechanism persists: the pleasure of moral superiority, the ecstasy of public punishment. He would warn that those who govern by outrage will soon be devoured by it, for passion obeys no master for long. He would study the universities and call them the new courts of conformity. Where once scholars sought truth, now they seek approval. He would see in their bureaucracy a mirror of old priesthoods, rituals of virtue, censures of dissent, and the worship of purity over clarity. He would say that knowledge, when politicized, becomes propaganda with footnotes. The true thinkers of an age, he would whisper, are always exiles uninvited to the banquets of orthodoxy, feared because they refuse to perform allegiance. He would remind us that truth and comfort do not coexist. He would examine how technology has dissolved privacy and call it the perfect evolution of statecraft. He would see the endless surveillance cameras, microphones, biometric scans, and smile knowingly because the most obedient citizens are those who believe they are free. He would say the modern ruler no longer needs spies. The people volunteer as their own informants. Every photo, every post, every confession of daily life becomes a record of control. Men who once feared secret police now reveal their thoughts for applause. He would call it self-governance by vanity, the dream of every tyrant, achieved without coercion. He would look upon the modern corporation and see the perfection of hierarchy hidden under the illusion of teamwork. He would note how employees call their bosses leaders, how subordination is disguised as belonging, how obedience is packaged as ambition. He would call the modern office the monastery of the marketplace, complete with rituals, slogans, saints of productivity, and the silent worship of profit. He would remind you that men obey more faithfully when they believe they are part of a purpose. Every logo is a banner, every brand a kingdom. He would speak of love, not the poetic kind, but the political instrument it has always been. He would say that nations woo their citizens like lovers, promising intimacy while cultivating dependence. Patriotism, he would remind you, is the tender mask of control, binding emotion to obedience. The state must be loved, for fear alone cannot sustain long empires. The clever ruler, therefore, feeds sentiment like wine enough to warm loyalty, not enough to cloud perception. He would examine religion and see that even faith has adapted to modern power. The pulpit has become a platform, the sermon a broadcast, the priest an influencer of virtue. He would not mock it. He would say that power always borrows the symbols of belief. Every age needs gods to sanctify its systems, whether divine, digital, or democratic. The question is never whether man believes, but who benefits from what he believes. He would turn to the question of chaos, what happens when systems collapse. He would say that collapse is not failure, but correction. When empires overreach, nature restores balance through destruction. He would remind us that the fall of Rome was not the end of civilization, but the pruning of arrogance. He would say that collapse is merely nature's way of punishing excess order. Too much stability breeds decay. Too much control invites rebellion. The wise ruler leaves room for chaos, as generals leave gaps in their strategy to allow the unpredictable to serve them. He would look at the young, idealistic, restless, untested, and see both danger and hope. He would say that the youth of any age are clay, easily molded by those who speak their anger fluently. To win them, a ruler must not oppose their ideals but redirect them. Promise them freedom while defining its limits. Give them causes that exhaust their energy but not your authority. History's greatest tyrants and reformers alike have known this. Youth is the weapon of tomorrow's power. Shape it early, and the future bends quietly. He would watch the constant noise of information and call it the most exquisite distraction ever engineered. He would say that truth drowns not in lies, but in abundance. When everything is information, nothing is wisdom. The modern ruler governs not by censorship, but by saturation. He would see that ignorance today is not the absence of knowledge, it is the paralysis caused by too much of it. Men who cannot discern cease to act, and those who cease to act are easy to rule. And he would look finely at us, the ordinary men and women, scrolling through our days, debating morality while submitting to systems we cannot see, and he would sigh, not with contempt but with recognition. He would tell us that history has not betrayed him, it has fulfilled him. The stage is larger, the players more numerous, but the script remains his. For he understood the one law that has never changed, that the world belongs not to the righteous nor to the kind, but to those who see things as they are and act as they must. And as he fades once more into the corridors of time, he leaves us with no comfort, no plea, no salvation, only understanding that in every century the same game is played, and only the names have changed. Those who grasp this rule shape destiny, those who deny it are shaped by it. And thus, though he died 500 years ago, his shadow still walks among us alive in every act of power, every mask of virtue, every calculation of control. He foresaw the shape of our time long before it had a name. He read the pattern of human conduct, and from that pattern he drew a prophecy, not of technology or geography, but of psychology. He saw that every civilization, regardless of its costume, obeys the same laws of self-preservation, deceit, and ambition. He understood that history is not progress, but rotation, the same impulses, refined into subtler forms. And so, when he wrote of princes and republics, he was writing of the 21st century disguised as Florence. He predicted that when freedom becomes worshipped instead of understood, it would collapse into performance. Men would confuse the right to speak with the power to be heard, the illusion of participation with the substance of influence. They would drown in choice, not realizing that too much choice serves the ruler better than none. He saw that the people of the future would not be enslaved by chains, but by indulgence made docile through pleasure, distracted through abundance, and ruled not by tyrants, but by their own desires. He foresaw that virtue would lose its anchor when detached from necessity. Once men no longer fought for survival, they would manufacture moral battles to prove relevance. He predicted that politics would become theater, ethics would become branding, and belief would become a commodity sold to the highest bidder under the banner of truth. He wrote that appearances would one day become more decisive than action, because perception, once global, would rule reality itself. In our time, his vision breathes through every screen. He knew that fear would endure evolution. Its shape would change, but its function would not. He predicted that in the modern world, fear would not come from kings or swords, but from instability itself, from the dread of irrelevance, of anonymity, of failure. He would say that in such an age, men would obey not because they are commanded, but because they are anxious. They would cling to systems, institutions, and ideologies that promise certainty, even as those systems quietly erode their strength. He would call this the perfect tyranny, one that rules through dependency, not domination. He foresaw that leadership would no longer be defined by conquest, but by narrative control. The rulers of his future would not seize land, they would seize interpretation. They would mold meaning itself, deciding which truths survive and which are forgotten. In this, he saw the end of ideology and the rise of simulation. What matters is not whether something is true, but whether it is believed. In that belief, he said, lies the real architecture of power. He predicted that loyalty, the engine of all empires, would fragment into tribes of identity. As the world grew interconnected, allegiance would no longer flow upward toward states, but sideways toward causes, movements, and symbols. He saw that unity would become impossible, for every group would weaponize its grievances, mistaking them for purpose. This disunity, he warned, would not destroy civilization, but transform it into a labyrinth where every faction imagines itself free while remaining trapped in design. He foresaw the death of privacy, not as a tragedy, but as an inevitability. He understood that man's desire to be seen would overpower his instinct to hide. The modern subject, he wrote, would one day crave exposure as proof of existence. To be unseen would feel like death, and so he would volunteer his own surveillance. In this surrender, Machiavelli saw the final perfection of control, when men no longer distinguish between expression and confession. He predicted that institutions would one day lose authority, yet still function through inertia. Governments would survive by ritual, not legitimacy. Laws would remain respected in form, not in faith. Men would obey not because they believe, but because they fear the chaos of disbelief. Power, he said, endures not by trust, but by exhaustion. When the ruled grow tired of disobedience, stability returns. Thus he saw that order, even when hollow, would always outlast rebellion. He foresaw that the modern world would worship empathy as the new divine virtue, not out of compassion, but fatigue. He knew that man, overwhelmed by global suffering, would mistake feeling for action and confession for change. He predicted that this sentimental morality would make men manipulable, governed not by principle, but by emotional spectacle. He would say that in the age of universal empathy, cruelty would simply become bureaucratic, hidden behind the gentle face of collective care. He saw that the future's rulers would not conquer by violence, but by architecture, by constructing systems so total that rebellion would have no target. He foresaw that power would dissolve into process, authority into structure, and obedience into routine. No tyrant would be needed. The mechanism itself would govern. Men would find comfort in this machine, for it would give them purpose without risk. This, he would whisper, is the destiny of order when it outgrows the will that created it. He foresaw that truth, detached from sacrifice, would decay into opinion. When men lose the capacity to suffer for what is true, they cease to distinguish between belief and entertainment. In that vacuum, power rises effortlessly. The one who defines reality not through fact, but through repetition becomes the ruler of perception. He saw that one day, even lies would require no defense. They would simply outlive those who question them. He predicted that the final form of tyranny would not be political, but psychological. It would live inside man's sense of self, in his need to belong, in his craving for recognition. Once rulers learned to engineer identity, external coercion would become unnecessary. The governed would become both captor and captive, loving their chains because they are made of meaning. Freedom would survive only as a word. He foresaw that the future would not belong to nations, but to systems of influence. that governments would become servants of flows of data, of capital, of attention, while pretending to remain in command. He would see our world and say that sovereignty itself has become an illusion, replaced by management, and that the modern ruler no longer reigns, he regulates. He predicted that men, weary of freedom's burden, would one day beg for structure. He knew that chaos terrifies more deeply than tyranny, and that civilization, when pushed to confusion, always seeks a hand to steady it. And so, he wrote, the age that glorifies liberty will inevitably deliver itself to control not through conquest, but through consent. He foresaw our time because he saw what never changes. He saw the constants beneath the masks, the appetites that survive every ideology, the fears that outlive every faith. He knew that history is not a story of progress, but of refinement. The instruments evolve, the instincts remain. He wrote for princes, but he meant for humanity. His prophecy was not about politics. It was about the geometry of survival. And now, 500 years later, his reflection stands fulfilled. We are not his future, we are his confirmation. We have become the republic he warned of, where morality is currency, visibility is virtue, and truth is a luxury too heavy to carry. We are not ruled by kings, yet we serve their ghost discipline disguised as freedom, obedience baptized as individuality. He predicted our time not by foresight, but by understanding what endures, and in that understanding lies his immortality. Machiavelli did not create the modern world, he merely saw it before we did. He would say that every age mistakes its inventions for revolutions, yet nothing in the heart of man has ever changed. The form of power evolves, its nature does not. Men still kneel to what they fear and follow what flatters them. They still mistake noise for strength and mercy for weakness. And though they claim to have escaped tyranny, they have merely refined it, transformed domination into participation, obedience into consensus, servitude into pride. The modern subject governs himself exactly as the prince desires. He would observe that the decay of empires begins when appearance consumes purpose, when rulers care more for virtue's image than virtue's use, when states prefer reputation to strength, decline has already begun. For image without substance is a palace built on water, magnificent at sunrise, invisible by nightfall. He would warn that the modern ruler must not aim to appear good, but to appear effective. For in an age that worships results, efficiency is the new morality. He would remind us that liberty, without discipline, devours itself. Freedom is a fire that consumes those who play with it carelessly. It is not the gift of governments, but the burden of the capable. Those who cannot command themselves will always invite others to command them. And so, he would say, history will always oscillate between freedom and submission, not because man is wicked, but because he is weary. Few can endure the responsibility that liberty demands. He would whisper that politics is not the enemy of virtue, it is its crucible. True morality proves itself not in words, but in governance. Those who demand purity without power are children. Those who wield power without conscience are beasts. The art lies in balance. To use necessity without becoming its slave, to rule without becoming ruled by one's own ambition. He would see that leadership has become diluted by empathy, crippled by the need for universal approval. The prince of this era is terrified of judgment, apologizing for every act of strength. But no empire was ever sustained by apology. He would say that to govern is to offend some so that many may live. The ruler must carry the weight of decision as Atlas bore the sky alone, silent and unthanked. And finally, he would tell us that fate belongs to the daring. Fortune, like a tempest, spares only those who seize her by force. Cowardice is the true sin of rulers, hesitation, the seed of ruin. The wise act while others deliberate, for history is written not by the good, but by the decisive. In this, he would leave his final counsel, that to endure the chaos of men, one must master the calm of necessity. For in the end, only those who see clearly, act boldly, and stand alone will command both time and memory. He would say that history is not a record of justice, but of will. The world does not remember those who dreamed, but those who acted. Men speak endlessly of morality, yet it is the rare soul who transforms belief into structure, chaos into command. He would remind us that order itself is the greatest mercy of the powerful, and that those who govern must sometimes do what the good refuse, so that civilization may endure. To lead is not to please, it is to preserve. He would say that power is never clean, but neither is survival. The wise ruler does not seek purity, he seeks permanence. He understands that all virtue must serve a purpose, that all mercy must strengthen stability, that all justice must be measured by consequence. For when virtue becomes self-indulgent, it decays into vanity, but when it bends to necessity, it becomes the foundation of states. He would tell us that no ruler lasts forever, but systems endure when they are built on the truths of human nature. Fear and hope, desire and despair, these are the eternal levers of command. To deny them is to invite collapse. To understand them is to write one's name into the marrow of history. And so he would say, the ruler must govern men as they are, not as philosophers wish them to be. He would warn that power, once attained, demands discipline greater than ambition. For ambition conquers, but discipline sustains. The one who cannot rule himself cannot rule a world. The prince who chases applause will die forgotten. The one who endures hatred for the sake of order will be remembered as the architect of survival. The greatest victory is not conquest, but continuity. And so he would leave us with this, that the world belongs not to the righteous nor to the wicked, but to those who understand it without illusion. Those who see clearly the machinery of men, their hunger, their fear, their need for meaning, and who, with steady hands, turn that machinery toward endurance. For power is neither good nor evil. It is the pulse of life itself. To wield it well is rare. To wield it wisely is immortal. And in that wisdom cold, exact, and unflinching, Machiavelli's shadow still walks beside us, whispering not how to be loved, but how to last.